Relationships on the rocks have been all over media, and not exactly including salt or lime. Unless your home is under a rock, you've seen Harry and Meghan, Vanderpump Rules, and a host of other relationships taking a very public center stage. Today, I got the best advice one can get for this subject from licensed relationship therapist Alan Lewis from the Council for Relationships in Philadelphia. He laid some very important groundwork with how to navigate topics like difficult families, cheating, sex and intimacy, and the foundation of it all, communication. Now, let's get to business. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Tatiana Ryann, and this is the Businessy Podcast. Today, I have with me Alan Lewis from the Council of Relationships in Philadelphia, and we are going to be talking about all things relationships. Alan, how are you this morning?
Doing good, ready to talk about relationships. It's definitely something that needs to be talked about, and a lot has been going on in the media, so I'm glad to be here.
Oh my gosh, yes, so much has been going on between Vanderpump Rules and Real Housewives and Harry and Meghan and all this stuff. And there are so many questions that people have when they are getting into a relationship to begin with. And they see these things and they may get scared or they want advice. So this is why I came to you. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Council for Relationships does?
Yeah, so Council for Relationships is really about, obviously, relationships and really working with people. I know for me specifically, it's working with individuals, couples, families to identify some of these negative patterns of behavior, negative patterns in relationships, work with them to identify like how to block these patterns, create new patterns that are more sustainable, more rooted in health, build coping skills and strategies and other supports that might be necessary to make these change last, and really figure out what are some things that they need to build the relationships that are rooted in health and build behaviors that are going to have their needs and wants met in a healthy way rather than kind of going back to these old ways that really don't serve anybody anymore. So I think that that's a lot of what we do. We're also a training facility for new clinicians. So we're very much rooted in the fact of, relationships will always be with humans. I mean, humans are very relational, as we know, and there's always going to be the needs for support. So we're invested in training up new clinicians so that we can be the best at cultivating healthy relationships for anybody that comes through our doors.
Well, that's a huge point that I wanted to bring you on for, because there is so much diversity within the Council for Relationships. And a lot of people will find when they go to a therapist, it's not one size fits all. You have to find something that works for whatever your problem is, or whoever you are, and all that.
Yeah, and I always say that when I first start working with folks, it's always this time is for you. And, I really try, and I think that a lot of therapists really try to, check ourselves at the door of this time is for the therapist. And if I'm not the person that is going to be the best fit for you, if the work that we are doing is not hitting what needs to be hit, I have no problem with making referrals or giving resources for somebody that might be a better fit. And I always tell folks when they're looking for therapy that, you might have to, shop around a little bit and see what is a good fit. Because I think that there is this stereotype of, you kind of go, it's kind of like going to the doctor's office. You go, you see the doctor, you don't really have any say. I mean, you can find a new doctor, but that's a hassle. But no, I think that therapy is a little different in that it's about a connection. And yes, maybe it is a little bit uncomfortable, and leading into that uncomfortable a little bit. But if you're really seeing like, oh, I don't know if this is really a connection that I can feel vulnerable and a space that I can feel vulnerable in, really giving yourself that ability of I can find somebody else, or I can really communicate that to my therapist and maybe we can course correct, or they can be a person that can give me a referral to somebody that might be a better fit, because it is worthwhile and you're coming in with real issues and concerns that you want to address, and you want to build a space that is comfortable for you to do so, because we are going to be leaning into some really vulnerable things.
Yes. And how many therapists do you have on the council?
I think now we're over 100.
Wow. So yes, you're very diverse and there's a lot of options open for anyone that does come to you with their problems.
And I think that that's the important thing, because when we think about, historically, therapy has been taboo, especially in a lot of different cultures and people groups. So when we are training up clinicians, when we're gaining clinicians, we are looking for who are the populations that we really want to serve. Counsel for Relationships is very focused on eliminating barriers for treatment, whether that be financial, whether that be, culture and stigma. So we are really intentional about bringing on folks that might look like you, because there is that piece of I'm leaning against some stigma that might be in my community. And it would be great to be with somebody who may have a connection to that community, or who might look like me, to assist me in kind of leaning out of that stigma and going toward me actually making changes that I want to see in my life.
Right. And that's so important, is to have that you need. Now, let's dive in a little bit. When someone first gets into a relationship, there are those basic questions like how long you should wait to be intimate, when is a good time to introduce to family, like how far is this going to go, when do you start bringing up those questions?
And I think, honestly, a lot of these questions should be some of the beginning questions that you're asking. Maybe obviously not on the first date being like, so intimacy, when should we be intimate? Not being that robotic self.
Here's your contract.
Exactly. Here's my NDA, and here's kind of like my guidelines. But I think they are questions that should be kind of asked maybe in a joking, a jovial way, or like just like a getting to know you way of like, what has intimacy look like in relationships? Like, what do you value about intimacy in relationships? I also think that it comes with personal preference, because for some folks, intimacy is very different. Like for me, I know that, personally, I know some folks who, they don't see, sex as something that is as intimate as kissing. Kissing is very intimate for them. So for them, those conversations might be a little bit different. And for some other people who have heard that, they're like, what are you talking about? Sex is so intimate. It's way more intimate than kissing. So I think giving yourself that space of really knowing, what do you see intimacy as, and how can you begin to explore that early on in the relationship. I also think that there's a taboo when it comes to specifically intimacy and sex in relationships, that it's oftentimes very much a pillar of the relationship, but it's also something that we don't often talk about. I think it's weird for some folks to talk with their partner about intimacy, or talk with them about what they like or what they don't like. I think it's more commonplace now, but I think that we really need to lean into the discomfort that comes with, hey, I really like this. Hey, I don't really like this. All of those things that can be really uncomfortable to bring up with somebody, especially if you're just getting into a relationship with them. But it's so worthwhile, because you build that into the foundation of, hey, this is not taboo in our relationship. This is something that we're very open about, and we can be honest about that.
Yeah, that is actually a huge case that just came out with a celebrity who was a little kinky, you may say, and got involved with some people, and they weren't really down for it, but now all the things are coming back, and it should be a very huge beginning question when you meet someone, is the intimacy issue.
Yeah, especially because there's that saying, you don't want to yuck anyone's yum.
Yeah.
I think that with a caveat to that is that you also want to root your relationship in reality, and this is where I'm at. Hey, this is what I'm into. This is what I'm interested in, and give the other person that power or that ability to say, I'm not really interested in that, or I'm open to that. Let me explore that with you, or absolutely, and this is what I'm into. But I think it's really about being open and honest, so that that other person can make a decision for themselves. I think that sometimes, especially when it comes to kink or other things that you might really enjoy when it comes to intimacy, whether that just be, cuddling all the way up to sexual intimacy. I think that sometimes it can be really hard of like, oh, this is really embarrassing for me, I'm going to keep it to myself. But I think that's a disservice to you and to the person you're with, because it's taking away that choice. Is this something that I'm willing to do? Is this something that I'm interested in? And if not, then we can have discussions about what that means for our relationship, rather than you kind of making that decision for us.
Now, the family issue. When do you suggest someone meet another person's family?
I think that one of the things that I always say is it really depends on the family dynamic. If you are from a family where, it's very close knit, they are generally interested in who you are engaging with. I mean, I think that that's going to be a very different conversation than somebody who it's very hostile, it's very rigid. There are a lot of feelings about outsiders coming into the family. So I think having conversations about what your family dynamic looks like is really important. I think it also then allows your partner to know where you're coming from, because I think we've always seen in Hollywood or in some of these reality TV shows where, the person brings the person to the family and they're surprised by how that person is responding to their family. The mother might say, "Oh, you look good in that dress today." And they have a big reaction, not knowing the background of that, looks and diet and the way that I feel and something has always been taboo in this family. So I think that that's why it's important to have conversations with whoever you're with about the family dynamics, your role in the family. How does that play a part in how you engage with your family? What are some things that might be triggers for you, or potential patterns that exist in the family? So I think as you're having these conversations, especially early on in the relationship, it allows you to kind of root yourself in the reality of, this is my family, and now I feel comfortable, or now I feel prepared that you're going to be coming in here knowing a little bit more about us. And I think it really does come down to, am I ready? Are you ready? And have we had this conversation about what it would look like for us to meet each other's family? For some people, it's not that big of a deal. If you talk to your partner and say, "Hey, I'd like you to meet my family," and your partner's like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I want you to meet mine." That's a very different conversation than, oh my gosh, what if I bring this person around? What if my family does this? What if my family does that? That shows that there's a lot of anxiety here, and maybe we need to have a conversation about what it would look like for you to meet my family, rather than kind of just feeling like, oh, I feel this pressure. We've been together for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. We actually need to have a deeper conversation before this happens, and we really need to know, what would we see to indicate that we're ready to take this big step.
We just had a very, very public, large family in the media eye with this whole situation of family issues and introductions, and a Netflix documentary was made out of it, and a lot of name flinging and mudslinging happened at both sides, while the family just really stayed quiet about everything. What do you do if you are in that situation and you're caught in the middle of all of the mudslinging? And do you take that silent side? Do you speak out for your partner? Do you, what do you do in that situation?
And I think it comes down to, what are your capacities and also what are your boundaries? I know for some people, they're very protective of their partner, so their boundaries are very firm. If you say this, or if this comes out, or if this person does this, then I'm going to be responding. If they say this, this, and this, maybe I'm not going to give a response because it doesn't deem a response from me. But I think it really does come down to, where are your boundaries and what expectations exist between you and your partner? Because maybe for you, you are somebody who goes with the flow a little bit more, but for your partner, it's very hurtful when you don't advocate for them. And maybe they're not saying, "Oh, you need to trash your family," but really understanding what are the expectations of the person that you're with, and what are your expectations? Because I think that allows you to come from a us versus the situation, rather than a me versus you, or me, you versus your family. Because I think that that's when things can really go off the rails, and also it can be a detriment to the relationship, even though you might be staying quiet, because maybe your partner's like, "Why are we quiet when they're trashing me? Why are you quiet and you're not defending me?" Because those expectations haven't been talked about. I also think there is this space where you really have to be aware. And I keep saying, like, ground yourself in reality. And that's not really like oh, well, however they treat me, like, I have to be mindful that that's how it's going to happen. I say grounding in reality of what is, and what are you coming up against. So when we talk about a family who might be vocal and, really trashing you and really trying to get at you, where are they coming from? Why are they having this response? And oftentimes it's coming from a place of, I think that we had talked about, like, generational trauma, that, somebody has treated this way, or this has been a dynamic in the family that's been passed down, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Because I think that sometimes we can experience something and we see it as the norm. This is how we engage. This is how we function. And then suddenly somebody in the system's like, well, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And then they're seen as the hostile one, or the one like, oh, no, what are you talking about? This is how we do it. And then that leads to attack. That leads to frustration, because the family's like, we need to keep things the way that things are, and we're going to be entrenched in this. So I think rooting yourself in reality is, why is the family responding this way? Is this the cycle continuing? And if we're the ones that are going to be breaking that cycle, it makes sense that they're reacting this way to us. It doesn't make it right, but it makes sense as to why they might be reacting to us so strongly.
Now, as an outsider, maybe looking in, like you're a friend, or you're part of extended family, and maybe you see that blatant gold digging or ladder climbing going on. How do you broach that situation gently and, make sure that person is going into the relationship or a marriage per se covered?
I think that part of it, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is really doing that work to understand where you're coming from and really rooting yourself in. I'm communicating about this. I'm sharing this because of this. Oftentimes, if you're that outside person, you're sharing it for a reason. Are you sharing it because this person, you have something against this other person, and being mindful of that? And once again, it's not, oh, I can't believe you have something against this person. No, it's, you have to be mindful of that, because it's going to inform why you're communicating something to this other person. Are you communicating it because you're a friend and you're just really concerned about it? Are you concerned because you're part of this community, or you're part of this this family, and you're concerned about what that is going to do to the dynamic of the family? Really understanding why you're wanting to say something. And I think that that's the first step. And then realizing that at the end of the day, all you can do is do what's in your control. It's in your control to communicate something. It's in your control to get other people involved, or other supports that might feel a similar way, or might be concerned about this person. It's not in your control to make the person see, or to convince the person that what you're saying is true. We can't control what the other person is going to say. We can't control what the other person's going to think. We can't control what their decisions are going to be. So I think really grounding yourself in, all I can do is what's in my control. And I have to be cognizant and realize that this person might hear everything that I say, and they might lash out. They might be frustrated. It might be a detriment to our relationship. But at the end of the day, am I saying this because it's important to me? And if it is, I need to say it. I also need to be mindful that I can't control every consequence, whether good or bad, that comes from this.
Now, you just brought up consequences, and you just brought up not controlling someone else's reaction. How do you deal with starting conversations within a relationship, just the two of you, on not being sexually satisfied, feeling that there may be unfaithfulness going on? How do you start that conversation without engaging to the next level and making that person heated?
Well, and I think that it really requires that you be grounded in yourself, and you really be regulating yourself, and you have the things around you that are going to help you. I always say with my clients, what might you need before, during, and after a hard conversation? What do you need to be mindful of before? What are the things that you need to do to regulate yourself? What are the supports that you might need to activate? During, what are some things that you're going to do to cope and help you to stay in the moment and stay focused on what you want the person to hear? And after, what are some ways that you're going to do some self-care and really work to reinvest in yourself, or to regulate yourself even further after that really hard conversation? And I think also coming into it with that you're wanting this person to hear something from you. What are you intending them to hear? What do you want to communicate to them? And not allowing this other extra stuff get clogged in there. You have something you want to communicate. Don't allow things to derail because of something that happened, or allowing that to be the moment that you tack on other things to talk about. No, what are you trying to communicate, and really bring that to the person? I think that, as we had talked about, like, sex and intimacy should be really something that is talked about early on in the relationship, and it should really be led with honesty. I think one of the things I always bring up is Kristen Bell had talked about her therapist saying honesty without tact is cruelty. And I think that that's really important, because I think people will say, well, I'm just being honest to my partner. I'm just being honest when I say that I don't find them sexually attractive. I'm being honest when I say I like the company of other people more than them. And maybe there is something that you're trying to communicate, but there is no tact there. There's no kindness there. You haven't really reduced down what you wanting this person to hear. And without doing that, you're unintentionally, or sometimes intentionally, but under the guise of, oh, I didn't know, being cruel to them. So really giving yourself that space of, what is it I'm trying to communicate? And am I hiding behind this fact of, oh, I'm being honest, when in reality, I am being cruel? I also think coming at it from I'm trying to communicate with you so that we can figure out, what does this mean about our relationship? It doesn't have to turn adversarial necessarily. It's always, I want there to be honesty here, whether that is because you have been unfaithful, whether it's because we're not where we need to be sexually, whether it's we need to re-identify what our boundaries are in the relationship or what our relationship looks like. It's all rooted in us against this problem. I think when it becomes adversarial, it can really get into, we're entrenched and we're separate. We're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to figure out how to move forward. It's, I'm in my camp, you're in your camp, and we're not going to be moving. I also think that there's a caveat there, because you can't force the other person to come at it from us against this problem. If that person is entrenched, really understanding for yourself, okay, what does that mean for me? This is data for me. If this person isn't willing to talk about us sexually, if this person isn't admitting to, these other things that are happening outside of a relationship, what does that mean for me? Do I stay in this relationship? Is this not sustainable for me? Does that mean that I have to end things? Are there other things that are in my ability to control? But even if that person isn't willing to come in it from us versus the problem, there are still things that are decision makers for you, and really being able to identify those things.
A lot of this has come up because of the Vanderpump Rules.
Mm-hmm.
We're in session 2. We're waiting for session 3 next week. And all of this stuff between Ariana and Tom is now coming out,
Mm-hmm.
like just fully coming out, where everybody can watch it on full display. And there's one thing that was brought up, and it was only touched upon. And Tom had said he didn't want to break up with Ariana, or so he'd tried to, but she brought up that she wanted to move someplace else and her life would be ending there. And I guess he misconstrued that as to one of her past mental health issues. When you're dealing with that in a relationship also, where somebody's going through a lot, like Ariana was, her dog died, her grandmom died, like a lot of things were going on. How do you deal with someone that may have that kind of reaction with, I'm going to commit suicide if you leave? How do you deal with that?
And I think a full disclaimer, I have not seen an episode of Vanderpump Rules. I have fallen down rabbit holes of the reunion and everything with Ariana versus Tom, and I do have opinions, but I find myself in the reunions. I like come at it from a therapy perspective. I'm like, Ariana, you just said, and I'm like, nobody wants that. So I really have to be mindful of that. But I think that there was something that when there was the conversation between Ariana and Tom, where she said, then you get this person involved, just like you're doing now. And I think there is something to be said there of if you're somebody who needs to talk about something and your partner has talked about how they've threatened of harming themselves, they have irrational behavior, the thing that is in your control is, how do you maintain safety for yourself and for that other person as best as you can? And I say as best as you can because, once again, all you can do is exhaust everything that you can. At the end of the day, you can't force that other person to be safe, but you can maintain safety for yourself. So it's very much like Ariana said, what were other things, or who are other people or other supports that could be activated to come in after this conversation happens or as this conversation is happening, and really surround that person while you make your exit or while you kind of disentangle yourself from them, so that they are the ones that are going to assist this person through it, rather than feeling like, oh, I have to stay in this. This is on me. What are the other supports? And if there are no other personal supports, what are other community supports? Is this a time that we would call mobile crisis? Is this a time that having somebody on speed dial on your end, just in case something does kick off? Or is this a time where we have to have somebody as mediator? Really being mindful of what other supports are there at your disposal that need to happen. Because I think that the thing that was so ironic was that it was, well, I'm just stuck here, so I'm going to do whatever. And it's like, no, just because there might be volatility or there might be the fear of irrational behavior, it doesn't give you the license just to do whatever you want to. I know that obviously there are different situations where it's very unsafe for the person. And that's a little bit different because it does come down to, it might take a longer time to amass some of these other supports. But that's a little different. That wasn't necessarily the case as far as I know, and as far as we know in the situation between Ariana and Tom. So I think that that's important, that you are only able to maintain safety. And if you're afraid, that's information, like what other supports might you need. It doesn't give you the permission to just treat this other person however and make decisions that are best for you without considering the other person.
That's an amazing fact that you just brought up, that you should at that point have the support systems in place. If you know there is past acts or of irrational behavior, that's a great idea to have that kind of thing going on. Now, how can someone outside of the situation, like we just said, they're now doing the reunions with all of the friends there, and all of the friends are now seeing some manipulation that was going on, and not just with one party, two parties. And one of the main factors was, if somebody had brought this up to me, this wouldn't have been a problem. I would have left. How do you as a friend see that manipulation going on and say, look, this happened, we need to sit down and talk because this is not a good situation for you to be in?
And I think that was part of, I think some clip or some part of maybe of an earlier something. Once again, I'm piecing these down a rabbit hole, but I think it was that somebody had brought something up and Ariana was like, oh no, that's not right. That's not true, or something like that. And it was very much a self-protection, very much of like protecting the relationship kind of feeling. So I think that being that outside person where you're seeing some of this manipulation or seeing some of these behaviors, you have to be mindful that the person that you're saying this to might not be ready to see it and might not be ready to address it. And that's not license for you to be like, oh well, then that's on that person. I think it's still on you to say, this is something that I need to say, and it might impact the relationship, but I would not be fulfilling my role as friend if that's something that is important to you. If it's not, then that's a decision you can make, which has other consequences down the road, as we see. But I think giving yourself that space of, this person might not be ready for what I'm about to say, but I still need to say it, and our relationship might take an impact from it. All I can do is communicate what my concern is and be there to support them, whatever their decision is. If their decision is, you know what, I've heard what you said, I'm still going to invest in this, am I able to continue to support them? If I'm not, maybe they'll have different access to me, or maybe our relationship will look different. But I also have to be mindful that at the end of the day, they need to make these decisions. So as that person that's coming in to it, or that outside person, I have to be aware of, I can only do so much before this other person is ready. And I can also be there when that person does become ready. It might be very far after I've already communicated my concerns to them.
Now, as a person that may have these things said to them, and you don't know what to do, and that person says, well, here's my therapist number, you may need it. What do you suggest to that person? Do they do their own research? Do they find their own? Because a lot of times you'll, neighborly or friendly or, everybody knows each other, and you may not want to be in that everybody knows each other situation where you want to take this on and be able to defragment yourself by
Mhm.
yourself with someone that is completely not in the situation.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think because I think that you're right. The first thing to do is like, oh, my therapist is great. Here's the number, and maybe you don't want it to be like, oh, we're talking about the same thing, or this person has talked about me to their therapist, so I don't know what their therapist knows. I think that even giving that therapist a call or like shooting an email and saying, hey, I was referred to you by this person. Do you have recommendations for other therapists you might work with? Or I'm looking for this type of therapist. So that way it might be a word of mouth of somebody else that might be a good fit, but isn't that same person, and kind of like muddying the waters by you going to the same therapist that your friend goes to. I also think that, yeah, there is a part of, if you want to do your own research, or if you want to find something that does fit a little bit more of what you're looking for, you don't necessarily have to go down that hole of, oh, this is my friend's therapist, let me see what they have to say. If you want to type in, I think that a lot of therapists are key on marketing and really understanding like the keywords in Google, those types of things. If you are looking for a Black female presenting therapist in Philadelphia, if you type that into Google, the likelihood of people popping up is very important, because people are noticing that people are looking for some of these key dynamics in the therapy room. So giving yourself that space of, whether word of mouth, whether doing your own research, the important thing is finding somebody that is going to be a fit for you, and not allowing some of those things like, oh, I'm just going to go with this person because my friend said that they were good, but I'm uncomfortable because I'm not sure what was shared with them. I think that that would impact the work you're doing. So being mindful of that and leaning into, that's okay, and I can find somebody else, or I can really find somebody who is fitting more of what I'm looking for as I'm navigating these really hard issues.
As someone who may navigate these very hard issues, a lot of times friendships are broken. How do you deal with somebody that's dealing with that, who may have had, like you just brought up, was so blinded to the fact that things were going on, and
Mhm,
they were completely engulfed in this person's family, this person's
mhm,
friends and everything. So all of their bridges are kind of burned.
mhm.
How do you help someone deal with that?
I think the first thing that I do is really identify and recognize that this person's grieving. And I know that grieving is synonymous with, like, the death of somebody or the loss of somebody, but really grieving can really also address the loss of a relationship, or loss of normalcy. So really rooting themselves in, right now you're grieving the loss of these friendships, you're grieving the loss of an involvement with this family. And what does that mean for you? What were you getting from these relationships that no longer exist? And allowing themselves to grieve that. Because I think that sometimes people are really confused because they're like, this is a good decision, or this is what's best for me. It's also hard. And they don't allow themselves to really grieve the things that they've lost, because their relationship with their partner didn't work out, or their partner made decisions that they could no longer sustain the relationship. So giving yourself that space to grieve the loss of the things in your life is really important. And I think that that also requires that you have those supports around you, being able to grieve with friends, and being able to communicate like what's going on for you, and allow yourself time to feel, rather than feeling like, oh, I have to just bury it down. And if you don't have those, personal supports, really reaching out to a therapist where you can take up the space to grieve and to feel the feelings, and not so that you stew in them, but so that you can begin to really process through those feelings and really catalog them, so that as you look for the path forward, your path isn't as muddied, or as littered with these feelings, because you've given yourself space to really process through. And of course there are going to be flare-ups. Of course there are going to be times where the first holiday when you're not together and the family usually got together, maybe that is a really big day for a lot of emotions. Giving yourself space to feel that, and knowing that healing isn't linear. It's very much an up and down, a roller coaster at times, and that's okay. So I think giving yourself that space of, what does healing look like? What does the grieving process look like for me? what are the supports that I might need if all of my personal supports no longer exist? What are some other supports that I might reach out to, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a support group, whether that's another community support, and giving yourself the space of, it's not weakness to reach out to these other supports. It's actually a strength of knowing what you want and what you need so that you can begin your healing journey.
Now, when do you recognize that someone is healing and they may have those ups and downs, or they're just using it as a crutch, as an excuse, as a sympathy gauge?
Yeah, and I think that it can be really hard, because I think that it can feel like, oh, I'm healing, or like, oh, this is a big hurt for me, or oh, this is something that is overwhelming for me, or this is something that I'm stuck at. And I think there can come a time where it's like, okay, are you stuck there and you don't want to continue healing? Or is there still feeling there? Is there still something that needs to be dug out? Is there something that you need to go deeper on? And I think that that's where therapy plays a big role, because it's not just, yes, there is a collaborative approach of, coming in and really figuring out what the future looks like. I also think that having that person that's outside of the situation who can see that hurt and say, oh, there's something deeper here. This is a stuck point for you. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's kind of get to that core of what's going on, for the purpose of not to say that that'll make everything go away, but more of, oh, there's healing that still needs to exist here. You're stuck here for a reason. Let's dig a little bit deeper. And I think that sometimes if you're in the situation, even if you're a friend that's kind of removed from the situation, but you're also in it, those stuck points can be really frustrating, because it's like, oh, it's been months. What are you talking about? Like, oh my gosh, can you just get over it? So I think that that's why having that person that's removed to allow you to kind of do a little bit more digging in that area and allow a little bit more healing to exist is so important. And once again, maybe you're not ready to move. Maybe you're not ready to get over it just then. But I think having that outside voice saying, you're going to need to address this, or you're not going to be able to progress, is something that is crucial, and maybe is received a little bit differently than if a friend says, can you just get over it? Because it's not, and it's rooted in this, I want you to get better. I want you to, have everything you deserve. But having that outside person, that therapist saying like, oh, you need to address this so that you can progress, might be received a little bit differently.
Alan, you have given us so much wonderful advice for all of the friend issues, the family issues, the relationship issues. Where can everybody find the Council for Relationships, you, if they need to reach out?
You can find us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, under Council for Relationships. You can find me on Instagram at MFT Foodie. And you can look at us at www.councilforrelationships.org.
Okay, and I will put all of these connects at the bottom of the podcast itself, so people can connect with you, people can connect with the council if they need their help. Thank you so much for all of your time, Alan. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Tatiana Ryann. This is the Businessy Podcast.